Admiral Victoria Hayes stood at the observation deck of the Earth vessel Starweaver, her reflection barely visible against the backdrop of stars. The massive holographic display showed thousands of alien vessels emerging from hyperspace, their angular shapes casting long shadows across Earth's defensive line. "Status report," she said, taking a sip from her steaming cup of Earl Grey tea. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez glanced up from his console, trying to suppress a grin. "The Nexian Empire's fleet just finished their dramatic entrance, Admiral. They're broadcasting their demands on all frequencies. Want to hear it?" "Why not? It's been a slow Tuesday." The bridge filled with a booming voice, speaking in what the Nexians probably thought was an intimidating tone. "Primitive species of Sol 3, bow before the might of the Nexian Empire. Your inferior technology and limited understanding of the universe leave you no choice but to submit. Resistance will result in immediate annihilation." Silence fell across the bridge for precisely 3 seconds before the entire crew burst into uncontrollable laughter. Even the ship's AI, Nelson, joined in with a synthesized chuckle. "Oh my," Hayes wiped a tear from her eye, "that's the best one yet." "Nelson, please tell me you recorded that for the annual First Contact blooper reel?" "Already archived, Admiral," the AI responded. "I took the liberty of adding appropriate background music. May I suggest the Imperial March from Star Wars?" The Nexian fleet hung in space like a swarm of metallic insects, their ships bristling with what they considered advanced weaponry. Their sensors were no doubt confused by the apparent primitive nature of Earth's vessels, simple geometric shapes with minimal external features, no visible weapons, and power readings that suggested they ran on basic fusion reactors. "They're charging weapons," Admiral Rodriguez reported, still chuckling. "Looks like plasma torpedoes. How retro." Hayes settled into her command chair, crossing her legs casually. "Well, we should at least pretend to take them seriously. Standard first contact protocol? The laughter initiative, ma'am?" "Indeed. Nelson, please begin broadcasting What Does the Fox Say, on all frequencies. And make sure to include the dance video." As the ancient Earth meme began playing across space, the Nexian fleet's attack faltered. Their sensors must have been scrambling to understand why their targets were responding to threats of annihilation with outdated pop music and dancing animals. "Admiral," Communications Officer Priya Sharma called out, "we're receiving a very confused message from their flagship. Their Supreme Commander Zwextal demands to know if we're mocking them." Hayes took another sip of her tea. "Send them the cat video compilation next. The one with the cucumber pranks." The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, having performed this protocol dozens of times before. Earth had discovered long ago that nothing confused hostile alien species quite like responding to their threats with humanity's most ridiculous cultural artifacts. The Nexian fleet's first volley of plasma torpedoes dissolved harmlessly against the Starweaver's quantum field, their energy converted into something more useful, in this case, powering the ship's coffee makers. "Thank you for the energy donation," Hayes instructed Sharma to transmit. "Our baristas appreciate your contribution to their morning brew. Would you like to see our menu?" The Nexians responded with their full arsenal: particle beams, graviton pulses, and antimatter warheads. Each attack was absorbed, converted, and redirected into various ship systems. The Starweaver's greenhouse got a nice boost to its lighting, the recreation deck's holographic projectors received a power upgrade, and the waste recycling system achieved 400% efficiency. "They seem frustrated," Admiral Rodriguez observed. "Their Supreme Commander is demanding to know what kind of defensive technology we're using." Hayes finished her tea and stood up. "Send them a basic physics textbook. A children's one, with lots of pictures. And highlight the chapter about conservation of energy. Oh, and add a sticky note suggesting they might want to review the section about quantum entanglement. Their targeting systems could use some work." As the Nexian fleet regrouped for another attack, Hayes couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for them. Like so many others before them, they had come expecting to find a primitive civilization, easy prey for their empire. Instead, they found humanity, a species that had long ago realized that the best defense against hostile aliens was to confuse them so thoroughly that they questioned every decision that led them to Earth's doorstep. "Admiral," Nelson announced, "they're attempting to scan our ships again. Should I show them the decoy schematics? The ones that suggest we power our vessels with hamster wheels and rubber bands?" "Please do, Nelson. And add a note about our emergency backup system being powered by dad jokes and bad puns. Let's see how their translator handles those." As the first hour of First Contact drew to a close, the mighty Nexian Empire was facing something they had never encountered before, a species that responded to their greatest shows of force with memes, cat videos, and helpful suggestions about improving their technology. Their perfectly choreographed invasion had devolved into confusion and frustration, while Earth's defenders hadn't even needed to move from their starting positions. Hayes looked at her empty teacup and smiled. "I think it's time for the final touch. Nelson, prepare to transmit the entire history of human internet culture, starting with Nyan Cat and ending with yesterday's viral videos. Let's show them what they're really dealing with." The day was young, and Earth's first line of defense, humanity's ability to face cosmic threats with absurdist humor, was working perfectly as intended. Grand Marshal Krolix of the Nexian Empire stood rigid on the bridge of the stellar dominance, his iridescent scales shifting from their usual confident purple to a confused green. In his centuries of military service, he had overseen the subjugation of 17 civilizations, but none had ever responded to the Empire's might with internet cats. "Explain again," he commanded his chief science officer, Relix, "how are they converting our weapons fire into beverage preparation?" Relixa's tail twitched nervously as she manipulated the holographic displays. "Unknown, Grand Marshal. Their ships appear to be using some form of energy conversion we've never encountered. Our sensors indicate their vessels are powered by primitive fusion reactors, but..." She hesitated. "But what?" "But they're simultaneously broadcasting their ship schematics, which claim they're powered by something called meme magic and the collective force of human procrastination." Relixa's scales flickered in distress. "Our xenoculture specialists are still trying to determine if this is a translation error." The massive viewscreen showed Earth's defensive fleet, still maintaining their casual formation. The ships looked deceptively simple, smooth, almost featureless surfaces that seemed to absorb light in strange ways. Krolix had expected them to panic when the Empire's fleet emerged from hyperspace. Instead, they had responded by transmitting something called a rickroll on all frequencies. "Grand Marshal," his communications officer called out, "they're broadcasting again. It appears to be cooking instructions." "What?" "Yes, sir. Something called How to Make the Perfect Cup of Coffee, a guide for spacefaring civilizations. They've included detailed diagrams and, sir, they're suggesting our energy weapons would be better utilized for heating water to precisely 96 degrees Celsius." Krolix's scales shifted to a deep blue of contemplation. In all his years serving the Empire, he had never encountered a species that treated planetary invasion as an opportunity for cultural exchange and beverage recommendations. "Sir." His tactical officer's scales had turned pure white, a sign of shock. "The humans, they're having a party." Sure enough, the sensors showed Earth's ships had begun broadcasting music and what appeared to be dance instructions. The closest human vessel had extended what their transmissions identified as a dance floor, though how they had converted a defensive shield array into a space-based disco was beyond Imperial understanding. "They're inviting us to join them," the communications officer reported, scales now cycling through confused colors. "They say, and I quote, 'Since you're just hanging around trying to invade us, you might as well learn the electric slide.'" Krolix felt a headache building behind his primary eyes. The Empire's tactical doctrine had no protocols for dealing with a civilization that responded to threats of planetary annihilation with dance parties and coffee recipes. "Launch the cybernetic infiltration probes," he ordered. "Let's see how they handle our most advanced digital warfare systems." The probes streaked across space, their quantum processors primed to penetrate and override Earth's primitive computer systems. They passed through the human ship's seemingly non-existent defensive screens with suspicious ease. 3 minutes later, all the probes reported success in accessing Earth's information networks. 5 minutes after that, they stopped responding entirely. 10 minutes later, they reactivated, but now they were broadcasting something called cat memes and demanding treats. "Sir," Relix reported, her scales now showing bands of scientific fascination, "the humans didn't stop our probes from accessing their networks. They just showed them pictures of small furry animals until they switched sides. That's impossible. Our cyber warfare systems are purely logical constructs. They can't be swayed by images of." Krolix checked the display, kittens wearing space helmets. "Apparently they can, sir. The probes are now requesting we redistribute our military budget to something called space catnip research." The situation was spiraling out of control. The Empire's most advanced weapons were either being converted into beverage-making accessories or defecting after exposure to Earth's bizarre culture. Worse, Krolix's crew was starting to show dangerous signs of curiosity about human customs. "Sir," his cultural attachment officer whispered, scales flickering with barely contained excitement, "I've been analyzing their transmissions. Did you know they have over 50,000 variations of prepared coffee beverages? And something called memes that appear to be their primary form of cultural exchange? The anthropological implications are fascinating." Krolix slumped in his command chair, watching as his mighty invasion fleet was gradually transformed into an impromptu cultural conference. Half his ships were now engaged in what the humans called a dance-off, their crews attempting to master something called the Macarena. The other half were busy trying to replicate Earth coffee with their matter synthesizers. Grand Marshal, his second-in-command, approached cautiously, "Perhaps we should consider a different approach. The humans seem eager to share their knowledge, and some of their technology, despite its apparent simplicity, is clearly beyond our understanding." "Are you suggesting," Krolix's scales rippled with disbelief, "that the mighty Nexian Empire should abandon its conquest and take dance lessons from its intended victims?" "Well, sir," the officer's scales shifted to a diplomatic shade of azure, "they did promise to teach us how to make something called a cappuccino if we stop trying to invade them. And honestly, sir, their coffee does smell better than our standard stimulant pods." Krolix stared at the view screen, where Earth's ships continued their casual display of incomprehensible technology masked by apparent primitiveness. His own fleet, the pride of the Empire, was now more interested in learning human beverage preparation techniques than continuing their invasion. In all his years of service, he had never filed a retreat order. But perhaps, he thought as his scales shifted to a contemplative violet, it was time to consider a strategic cultural exchange instead. After all, any species that could turn the Empire's most advanced cyber warfare systems into cat enthusiasts clearly had something to teach them. Besides, he had to admit, he was getting rather curious about this coffee himself. Dr. Samira Patel, Earth's leading xenoanthropologist, arrived on the Starweaver's diplomatic deck carrying what she considered humanity's most powerful first contact tool, a vintage Italian espresso machine. Around her, the ship's crew was busy setting up what looked more like a cozy cafe than a formal diplomatic chamber. "Are you sure about this approach, Doctor?" Admiral Hayes asked, watching as Patel lovingly polished the chrome surface of the machine. "Trust me, Victoria," Samira replied, measuring out freshly ground beans. "Nothing breaks down cultural barriers quite like the perfect cup of coffee. Besides, their fleet's been trying to copy our recipes for the past hour using their matter synthesizers. Might as well show them how it's really done." The diplomatic chamber's doors whispered open, admitting Grand Marshal Krolix and his senior staff. The Nexian delegates paused, their scales shifting through various shades of surprise as they took in the informal setting. Instead of the expected stark negotiation table, they found comfortable seating arranged around small tables, the air filled with the rich aroma of brewing coffee. "Welcome aboard the Star Weaver," Samira said warmly, tamping down the espresso grounds. "Would anyone like to learn how to make a proper cappuccino?" Krolix's scales flickered between diplomatic purple and curious blue. "You invite us to your ship, to teach us beverage preparation?" "Well, you seemed interested in our coffee technology," Samira replied, starting the extraction. "And I've always found that people understand each other better over a good cup of coffee. Besides, your matter synthesizers are getting the molecular structure all wrong, they're replicating the chemical composition but missing the art of it." To everyone's surprise, Relix, the Nexian science officer, stepped forward first. Her scales had shifted to an eager shade of turquoise. "The human is correct, Grand Marshal. Our attempts to replicate their beverage have been unsatisfactory. Perhaps a deeper understanding of their methods could provide insight into other aspects of their technology." Samira smiled, steaming milk with practiced precision. "Exactly. You know, the perfect cappuccino is actually a wonderful introduction to quantum physics. The milk proteins denature and restructure in a way that's quite similar to quantum field manipulation." What followed was perhaps the strangest diplomatic session in human history. As Samira demonstrated the art of coffee making, she casually wove in explanations of advanced physics principles, using the behavior of coffee and milk as metaphors for quantum mechanics and energy conversion. "You see," she explained, showing Relix how to create the perfect milk foam, "it's all about energy states and phase transitions. Just like how your plasma torpedoes are really just excited particles looking for a stable state, which is why our ships can convert them so easily into useful energy. Would anyone like to try making one themselves?" To Hay's amazement, the Nexian delegates proved to be enthusiastic students. Their scales shifted through fascinating patterns of color as they learned to operate the espresso machine, each successful cup met with ripples of pleased ultraviolet hues. "Remarkable," Relix muttered, analyzing a perfectly pulled shot of espresso with her handheld scanner. "The energy efficiency of this brewing method is surprising. And you say this is considered primitive by your standards?" "Oh, this is practically antique," Samira replied, helping another Nexian officer with their milk steaming technique. "But sometimes the old ways are best. There's something about the hands-on process that creates a connection you just can't replicate with more advanced technology." As the session progressed, the conversation naturally flowed from coffee to culture, from physics to philosophy. The Nexians, their initial military rigidity softening, began sharing stories of their own cultural practices. Krolix, his scales now a relaxed shade of azure, admitted that the Empire's traditional conquest protocols might need updating. "Perhaps," he said, carefully sipping his third cappuccino, "we have been too focused on technological superiority as a measure of civilization. Your species appears to have mastered something far more impressive, the ability to advance tremendously while maintaining connection to your roots." "That's humanity for you," Hayes commented, accepting a perfectly crafted latte from an enthusiastic Nexian officer whose scales now showed barista pride. "We never really let go of anything. We just keep adding layers. One day we're splitting atoms, the next we're arguing about the best way to make toast." "Speaking of toast," Samira interjected brightly, "wait until you try Earth's breakfast pastries. They pair wonderfully with coffee, and the physics of proper croissant lamination is fascinating." The diplomatic session extended well into the ship's evening, with discussions ranging from the practical applications of quantum field theory to the importance of proper coffee bean storage. The Nexian delegates, who had arrived expecting either conquest or combat, instead found themselves taking notes on coffee grinding techniques and arguing good-naturedly about the optimal milk temperature for latte art. "You know," Samira said to Hayes as they watched a group of Nexian officers attempting to create heart shapes in their lattes, their scales shifting to frustrated pink when they failed. I think this might be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Indeed, Hayes replied, hiding a smile as Krolix's scales turned triumphant gold upon successfully creating a perfect Rosetta pattern. Though I suspect the Empire's next fleet upgrade might prioritize better beverage replication technology over weapon systems. Is that such a bad thing? Not at all. After all, a civilization that appreciates good coffee can't be all bad. As if to prove her point, the diplomatic chamber echoed with surprised trills of delight as the Nexian science team finally mastered the art of proper crema formation, their scales collectively shifting to the deepest shade of satisfaction their species could display. Lieutenant Daniel Jackson hadn't expected to spend his afternoon teaching quantum mechanics to alien visitors, but as the Starweaver's education officer, he was used to adapting to unusual situations. The ship's auxiliary classroom, normally used for crew continuing education, now hosted 24 Nexian officers, their scales shimmering with anticipation. Right then, he said, activating the classroom's holographic display. Since you're all so interested in how our ships work, Admiral Hayes thought you might enjoy a basic physics refresher. We'll start with something simple: why your weapons don't work on our hulls. At the back of the room, Dr. Patel sipped her coffee and watched with amusement. The Nexians had their datapads ready, scales shifting between scholarly blue and embarrassed purple at having to attend what they assumed would be a remedial lesson. Now, your plasma torpedoes operate on the principle of contained ionic excitation, Jackson began, bringing up a basic diagram. It's a perfectly reasonable weapon design, for the technology level you thought we had. The problem is, you're thinking in three-dimensional terms. He gestured, and the holographic display expanded to show a complex mathematical model. Your torpedoes exist in what we call conventional spacetime. But our hull plating? It sort of isn't there when your weapons arrive. Relixa's scales flashed brilliant white with surprise. Not there? Well, it's there and not there simultaneously. Remember quantum superposition from basic physics? Like that, but applied to an entire ship's hull. We basically taught our ships to play jump rope with reality. The classroom erupted in a chorus of confused trills as the Nexian scales cycled through various shades of bewilderment. Jackson grinned and continued, here's a simple demonstration. Could I borrow someone's personal shield generator? A young Nexian officer stepped forward, offering his wrist-mounted device. Jackson thanked him and placed it on the demonstration table. Now, this is a very impressive piece of technology. Creates a localized energy field capable of deflecting most conventional weapons. But watch this. He reached out and passed his hand straight through the active shield as if it wasn't there. The Nexian scales collectively shifted to shocked white. Impossible! Relix exclaimed. That shield can stop a plasma blast. Exactly, Jackson nodded. It can stop plasma, energy beams, projectiles, anything operating in normal spacetime. But my hand? It's technically occupying several dimensional states at once. Your shield is trying to stop something that, from its perspective, doesn't fully exist in the same reality it's defending against. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of scales rustling as the Nexians processed this information. Then Relix asked the question Jackson had been waiting for, but, your ships look so primitive. Our scans showed basic fusion reactors, simple alloy construction. Jackson laughed. Oh, those readings? That's just Nelson having a bit of fun with your sensors. Speaking of which, Nelson, could you drop the camouflage on the classroom's walls? Just for a moment? The seemingly simple metal walls of the classroom shimmered and became transparent, revealing an infinity of interconnected geometric patterns that extended seemingly forever in all directions. Several Nexian officers made distressed chirping sounds as their scales turned pale. Don't worry, Jackson assured them, you're perfectly safe. You're just seeing a small portion of the ship's actual structure. We find it's easier on the eyes to keep it hidden behind a conventional appearance. Tends to prevent headaches among species that haven't evolved to perceive 11-dimensional space. 11 dimensions? Krolix's scales had turned a fascinating shade of humbled gray. Give or take a few, depending on what the ship feels like manifesting today. We found it's better to let them have some flexibility. Happy ships make for smoother flights, you know? The ships are alive? A Nexian engineer's scales were practically strobing with confusion. Not exactly alive, Jackson corrected, letting the walls return to their simple appearance. More like, semi-conscious. It's a bit like training a very large, very complex pet that happens to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Which reminds me, Nelson, could you stop playing with their fleet's navigation systems? I know it's fun, but it's making their helmsman dizzy. The AI's voice echoed through the room, sounding slightly disappointed. Very well, Lieutenant. Though I must say, their attempts to compensate for my temporal wake distortions were quite entertaining. Krolix's scales shifted to a deep blue of realization. You've been humoring us this entire time? Even during our attack? Well, we didn't want to embarrass anyone, Jackson said diplomatically. Besides, Dr. Patel has been wanting to test her theory about coffee as a universal diplomatic tool. Speaking of which, he gestured to a corner of the room where a coffee machine was materializing out of what appeared to be folded spacetime. Anyone ready for a refill? I find complex physics goes down easier with caffeine. As he began preparing fresh cups of coffee, Jackson continued his lesson, explaining how humanity had long ago realized that the most advanced technology shouldn't look advanced at all. It's like that coffee machine, he explained. Sure, it's actually manipulating quantum fields to perfectly extract flavor molecules across multiple probability states, but it still looks like a simple brewing device because that's what makes people comfortable. Is that why you responded to our invasion with memes and cat videos? Relix asked, her scales showing fascination. Partly, Jackson admitted. But mostly because it's funny. We found that a sense of humor is actually essential when dealing with higher dimensional physics. The universe itself has a pretty good one, once you learn to appreciate it. The lesson continued, with Jackson gradually introducing the Nexians to increasingly complex concepts, each explained through carefully chosen metaphors and practical demonstrations. By the end of the session, the alien officers had filled multiple datapads with notes, and their scales had settled into a uniform shade of scholarly appreciation. Remember, Jackson concluded, the most important thing we've learned about advanced technology is that it should serve life, not dominate it. That's why we still make coffee by hand even though we could simply manipulate matter at the quantum level to create the perfect cup instantly. Sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. 3 months after what became known as the coffee incident, the Starweaver's observation deck hosted an unusual gathering. Admiral Hayes stood beside Grand Marshal Krolix, both watching Earth's first official cultural exchange center being constructed in space between their fleets. You have to admit, Hayes said, gesturing to the massive structure taking shape, it's a much better use of resources than invasion fleets. Krolix's scales rippled with amused agreement, their color now a relaxed shade of turquoise. Indeed. Though I'm still trying to explain to the Imperial Council why our military budget is being redirected to build what appears to be the galaxy's largest coffee shop. Cultural Exchange and Educational Center, Hayes corrected with a smile. The coffee shop is just a bonus. The structure itself was a testament to the unexpected partnership between human and Nexian engineering. Its outer layers appeared deceptively simple to avoid frightening visiting species, while its inner workings existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The Nexians had contributed their expertise in aesthetic design, giving the station an elegant, crystalline appearance that somehow managed to look both advanced and welcoming. Dr. Patel's latest report is quite interesting, Krolix noted, checking his datapad. Apparently, 17 other species have already requested permission to send delegations. It seems we're not the only ones who were curious about the civilization that responds to invasion attempts with memes and hot beverages. Speaking of beverages, Hayes gestured to where Lieutenant Jackson was teaching a group of Nexian engineers about the relationship between proper coffee grinding techniques and quantum field manipulation. Your people have become quite skilled baristas. Yes, though some of our more traditional military leaders are still struggling with the concept of warrior baristas. But it's hard to argue with results. Krolix's scales shifted to a proud gold as they watched one of his officers successfully create a perfect latte art rosetta using quantum foam manipulation. Nelson's voice chimed in overhead, "Admiral, Grand Marshal, Dr. Patel requests your presence in Laboratory 3. Apparently, the joint research team has made a breakthrough in cross-dimensional coffee brewing. The laboratory, like most spaces on the Star Weaver, had evolved over the past months to accommodate both human and Nexian preferences. Holographic displays showed complex equations floating alongside coffee bean roasting profiles, while quantum field generators hummed next to vintage espresso machines. Dr. Patel stood at the center of the room, her excitement palpable. "We've done it," she announced as they entered. "We've finally figured out how to maintain the traditional coffee brewing experience while utilizing quantum field manipulation to ensure perfect extraction every time." More importantly, Relix added, her scales shimmering with scientific pride, "We've discovered that the principles behind this process can be applied to other forms of energy manipulation. We believe we can improve our ship's efficiency by at least 300% using what we're calling the coffee quantum principle." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me that coffee is going to revolutionize space travel?" "In a way," Samira grinned. "It turns out that the perfect balance between traditional methods and advanced technology that we use in coffee making can be applied to almost anything. The Nexians helped us realize that we might have gone too far in hiding our advanced technology. Sometimes it's okay to let the magic show a little." Around them, human and Nexian scientists worked side by side, their earlier hostility replaced by genuine collaboration. On one table, a group was using a modified coffee grinder to demonstrate principles of matter phasing to wide-eyed junior officers. At another station, engineers from both species were designing what they called a quantum French press that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. "We've learned so much from each other," Krolix observed, watching the team's work. "Your species taught us that true advancement isn't about displaying power, but about finding joy in discovery. And perhaps we helped remind you that it's okay to let your achievements shine sometimes." "True," Hayes agreed. "Though I still think responding to invasions with cat videos is one of humanity's better ideas." About that, Krolix's scales flickered with embarrassment. "Our fleet's AI systems are still requesting daily cat video updates. We've had to allocate specific bandwidth just for meme transmission. Consider it cultural exchange," Hayes laughed. "Speaking of which, shall we head to the new station's inaugural ceremony? I hear the cafeteria is featuring something called a quantum cappuccino." As they made their way to the station, Hayes reflected on how differently things could have turned out. Instead of war, they had coffee. Instead of conquest, they had collaboration. The observation deck offered a perfect view of Earth and the combined fleet, now peacefully intermixed, their ships sharing space as easily as their crews shared knowledge. "You know what the best part is?" Samira said as they watched the station's first official customers arrive, a mix of human, Nexian, and newly arrived alien species all eager to experience the famous coffee that had prevented a war. "We've proven that the universe's most powerful force isn't technology or weapons or even quantum physics." "Oh?" Krolix's scales shifted to a curious blue. "What is it then?" "The simple act of sharing a cup of coffee with someone different from yourself. That, and maybe cat videos." Nelson's voice chimed in one final time, "Speaking of which, I've just compiled a new collection of cat videos featuring quantum physics experiments." Shall I add them to the cultural exchange database? Hayes and Krolix shared a look, their very different forms of expression somehow conveying the same thought: the galaxy would never be quite the same again. And that was probably a good thing. Go ahead, Nelson, Hayes said. After all, what's the point of having the most advanced technology in the galaxy if you can't use it to share cat videos?